Anne-Marie, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce Emma, who I think is with us now.
Yeah, hi Emma. We're going to see your film. Maybe you can introduce yourself and we'll have a little chat after, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having us and giving us the opportunity to share some of our research. So, my name's Emma Sheehan. I'm an associate professor at the University of Plymouth, and this is our film Storm.
In 2014, we had these incredible storms.
It started blowing, I think, before Christmas and ran on till into March. But it wasn't just the wind, it was the strength of it. There was endless, 90-mile-an-hour wind.
We had the worst storms that we've ever seen. They were off the charts. In 2008, Lyme Bay received protection from bottom-towed fishing, so no trawling and no dredging from 2,006 square kilometres of seabed. But what's quite unusual is this whole area was protected from bottom-towed fishing, but you could still set pots and nets and you could still dive for scallops.
And so this gave the opportunity for the seabed to be protected in the bits of areas we've got, but also for it to recover and hopefully these big reef systems become more widespread and protected through time.
The government had taken a gamble to close this area. We needed to demonstrate that it was going to be worthwhile. And thankfully, Plymouth University got that contract and started setting up what turned out to be this incredible sort of long-term data set that is now reaping some massive rewards in terms of better understanding of reefs and things like that.
The problem was that it became a magnet for static gear, for large numbers of pots and nets, and that was beginning to drag up the very reefs that had been theoretically protected. And so Blue Marine Foundation, my charity, suggested to the local regulators, to the scientists, to the fishermen, to other conservationists that we should set up a working group to try and address this problem and manage Lyme Bay and its reefs sustainably.
The Lyme Bay project is the finest example in the UK of work that's been undertaken to understand the impact of declaring a marine protected area.
Because we've been monitoring these reefs since 2008, we had this amazing baseline understanding how these reefs were recovering over time compared to areas that were still open to fishing. And then when the storms hit, we then had an opportunity to compare the impact of the storms to this baseline that we had.
It blew for 2-3 months, phenomenally much stronger than normal, and then it took maybe another 2 weeks for the water to clear for us to dive. So there was no dead scallop meat, it was just big piles of empty shells washed up against sort of bits of reef and that.
One of the interesting things that we've seen is the rate of recovery from the storms appeared to be greater than the rate of recovery from fishing.
Initially, it was looking quite similar to when we first arrived in Lyme Bay after trawling, but the key thing was even though those reefs weren't resistant to the initial impact of the storms, what we saw by continuing to survey the reefs every year was that they bounce back and are bouncing back so much quicker than they ever did from years of bottom-towed fishing.
The idea is that if you have a really intact ecosystem with lots of diversity, lots of big organisms, it's a little bit more able to deal with our activities and our impacts and shocks than a more degraded system. So we will be able to test this, and there's two different parts to resilience. There's firstly resistance. So if you've got a protected system, does it resist those sort of changes more than a stress system? So you don't actually see the impact so much. And the second most important one probably is the recovery speed. So do the more diverse protected systems recover faster? And so again, we were able to test this following the storms. And what we found was that whilst the actual seabed was really quite badly impacted and a lot of the organisms were removed, what we found is that the speed of recovery following the storms was much quicker than the speed of recovery following the sort of chronic impact of fishing.
We have to extract still frame grabs from the moving video. So we do that using specialist software. And then we watch the videos through and we count all mobile and conspicuous species that we see between the two laser dots.
So we've got this unique data set that's got really high resolution over long time periods. That mean that we've seen marked increases in the number of mobile species and the diversity of these mobile species. And because of this data that we've got over 11 to 13 years now, we can use this to champion this type of management elsewhere and also use the information to improve management in other areas.
The research that we've undertaken at Plymouth University has enabled us to track the social and economic impacts of the Lyme Bay closed area, and also through this storm period that occurred in 2014, in order to be able to inform the evidence base for marine protected areas and sustainable fisheries and protected livelihoods.
The problem for everyone associated with fishing, with the industry, with the environment of the seas, is that it's a case of out of sight, out of mind. We don't see what's going on beneath the surface, beneath the waves. So this research that Plymouth University is carrying out just helps to demonstrate that by putting in the right safeguards, by certainly stopping some activities, you can allow a rejuvenation, a healthier seabed, the opportunities for fish stocks to grow, for ecosystems to be protected in ways which won't harm the future commercial interests of the fishing industry, but in the long term will be to their benefit.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, from my point of view, had we not had a protected area, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. My diving was every year while the dredging was going on was getting worse and worse. So eventually I would have had to have given up. But the protected area hasn't just benefited the guys who are scallop diving. You've got all the guys with static gear. They were catching more crabs, more lobsters. So it was rather a win-win. And none of the towed gear boats that were based in the ports that are in the protected area have gone out of business. They're all still there, all fishing and all, as far as I know, earning a reasonable living out of it. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
It's been an absolute privilege to monitor the recovery of the Lyme Bay reefs so far, but we still have so much more to do. The species we're monitoring haven't reached a plateau yet. We're still monitoring this, change over time. And what we really want to know is what do natural communities look like. And so within Lyme Bay, we still can't do this because we still have all these other human activities ongoing. So what we really want to see is more of Lyme Bays around the country, some areas that are protected like Lyme Bay where you exclude the whole area from bottom towed fishing. But even more, we want to see some areas that don't have any human activity so that we can truly understand what natural reefs can look like so that we can then properly manage these areas going into the future.
think you're muted, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Emma. I really enjoyed what I've watched it 3 times now, and I'm really enjoying watching the different people speaking about different elements of that system. It's fantastic. My favorite bit is watching the scallops swimming.
Yeah,
the
wheelies, they keep us entertained for hours when we're on the boat all day.
Yeah, and just I'd got a question from that, and then if there's any questions in the chat, we can talk about them. We've got a few minutes now. I wanted to ask about marine organisms and what they can teach us about the tides, and also about resilience and adapting to change.
Sure, yeah, when I started my career, I was really focused in the intertidal, and so I was really aware of tides and relied on them to access parts of the mudflats in the Exe to study crabs and birds and things. So I hadn't thought too much about how animals offshore were using tides, but some of our research involves using tags, like little transmitters that ping, and we insert these into sea bass, and then we've got a whole network of receivers around Devon, where we hear when our individual sea bass are nearby. And what we're really learning by tracking these individual sea bass around the coast is how important tides are and how they are using them, you know, to enter the estuaries and to come back out into the coastal areas. And even with some of the camera footage, we've actually learned whole new behaviours of animals that are using tides, exploiting the tides to move in different ways. So we never knew this until recently, but starfish will actually usually, you know, crawl very slowly around the seabed, but we've seen that they'll actually lift up their arms and bawl, and then like when the tides are really racing and running, they're all bouncing along the seabed and traveling at like massive, like really fast speeds in order to relocate efficiently to new areas. So I think there's so much we still have to learn, and so much the marine organisms can teach us about how they adapt in their behaviours to use tides in such a dynamic environment.
Thank you. I've got a question in the chat from Rory, which was, should local fishing grounds with 6 nm limit, probably miles, I think, limit, nautical miles,
yeah,
be reserved for local less than 10-meter boats? That's quite a technical question, but
what we'd love to see is just that the most destructive fishing practices, scallop dredging and bottom trawling, they should be zoned in areas where we are happy for them to have that, you know, to cause their destructive practices. And what we really need to do is allow our seabed to recover, and then provide brilliant fisheries for people using less destructive gear like nets and pots and scallop divers, and then the whole system, the whole ecosystem benefits and flourishes. But we really need to take care of our seabed first.
yeah. Oh, we've got another question from Vicky. How much opposition from the fishing industry was encountered when implementing the restrictions on the trawling and other destructive methods of fishing? Were the stakeholders given an opportunity to raise their concerns?
Wow. My experience in line-based started at that point really of when the MPA was designated. So I believe there was a consultation, but I certainly know that not everybody was happy, because I was not popular when I arrived. And you know, over the years we've built fantastic relationships with the fishermen, and certainly I think most people are now convinced of the benefits, and we see some fishermen changing gear type to allow them to fish inside the MPA because it's so productive and so prosperous.
Yeah, there's Emma, there's a really lovely film, a longer film, which maybe you could link us to, about how the MPA came into being, which I think people might be interested in as a follow-up.
Yeah, so the Blue Marine Foundation have produced an excellent film that really goes into the socioeconomic, the real details about the protected area, and how Blue Marine Foundation have actually worked with not just the fishermen, but all the local stakeholders, Natural England and DEFRA and the IFCAs, the MMO, to make sure that everybody is involved. And so it now really it might not have been perfect on day one, but certainly what we have now is a committee where everybody can share their views, and they've developed things like their own seafood labels, so that they're being recognised and rewarded for actually sustainably managing their seafood, which is fantastic.
Great, thank you so much. And also there's a couple of films that you sent me of rolling starfish, which we would also love to share with people, because they're starfish in a way you've never seen them before. So thanks, Emma.
Chat.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and now I don't know if Roy and Catherine. Yeah, you're there, brilliant. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can.
Good, great.
Okay, perhaps just before the the short videos shown, just say a little bit about.
Oh, before we say, I thought the previous talk was brilliant. I thought it was really lovely. Thank you very much, Emma. Do you want to carry on, Roy?
Okay, right. The title of this wee section is rock pools, and this rock pool that was videoed is in the north coast of Northern Ireland. And I am obligated to say this, beside the Giant's Causeway. That'll give you some geographical position where it is. It's nothing to do with Giant's Causeway. That's something else. And the rock pools occupy, obviously, rocky shorelines, and we've seen a lot of sand-based shorelines so far today. But this one's quite a rocky shoreline up along the north coast, beside a place called Dunservic. And rock pools occupy either high, medium, or low. That's the way they're classified. And high rock pools occasionally get water in them and are rather ephemeral, down to low rock pools, which are quite diverse in terms of their habitat. Perhaps there's anything else?
No, I think we could.
Well,
could we show? Could
roll the video?
Anne-Marie, could you show the video, please, or is it Joe who does the video? It's Joe.
It's Hayley. It's Hayley.
No, Hayley.
The rock pool. Anchored, but floating. Crevice, seen, yet hidden. Fronds, tangled but free. Water shallow, yet deep. Alone but connected. A realm of contradictions. The rock pool.
That's it, yes. So we can.
Can you
back
back?
again.
We're back.
Back again. So we've got a few more minutes just to perhaps chat about the rock pools.
Well, we did it. We went up on a day that was it was some time ago. It was about a year ago. It was just over a year ago, and we were actually going for a walk, and then we basically came upon these beautiful rock pools. So and Roy we just got this new camera, underwater camera, so we tested it out, and we were stunned, absolutely stunned at the beauty of these small. I mean, they were tiny. They were tiny rock pools, and probably only about that size, and absolutely stunning. And so, I thought they were incredible, but I think you would like to say something on the more scientific side.
Well, no, it's just I don't want to put rock pools have got a niche, an ecological niche in terms of how they link with the moving of tides and so forth, and a lot of mollusks and small fish and so forth. It's a strange thing, they find refuge in the rock pools, where they're actually subject to quite a lot of environmental changes because they dry out a little bit more, they get more saltier and so forth, and get warmer. So although they offer protection against what we saw in the previous video about rough, stormy events, they also are refuges for a lot of species, and there are some endemic and specific seaweeds, for example, grow in rock pools. Maybe just we've got a couple more minutes just to mention a couple of things that we talk about: climate change, global warming and so forth. Now, there's two aspects that we sort of have to bear in mind, as well as rising sea levels. It's the acidification that's taking place within seawater, and the acidification that is occurring prevents calcium carbonate being deposited by mollusks into their shells and so forth. So they're becoming more prone to storm damage. So even though they may continue to live, their shells are so much thinner that they're being damaged and suffering quite severely from the process of acidification that is occurring. That's a slow, well, it's not so slow. It's a gradual change in the pH levels, or reduction in pH levels in the seawater, this preventing this depositing. The calcium carbonate being deposited. And the second event, sorry to get too technical, but there's what's known as a hypoxic events, which is an upwelling of low oxygen waters caused by eutrophication and man-made, and there's some natural causes of hypoxic or low oxygen. And that is affecting species because if they're under stress, they cannot then live so well in low oxygen waters. And just to pick up again on previous talks, like the starfish, and it's been a lot of research is going into the starfish and their behavior and so forth. They're particularly affected by these low oxygen events, and research is going on into that. And there's some worry that in the northeastern part of the Atlantic, low oxygen waters are going to cause quite a demise in a keystone species such as starfish. Anyway, I think I've rabbited on too much, Catherine.
No, so basically we were walking along, found that there was a couple of rock pools, and it was actually quite high tide at the time, so that the water was coming in, and then it was starting to go out again, and you can see it was drawing out. So we have this beautiful flowing movement, and to be honest, I just think the flow of water, and of course, as the ice caps melt, the rock pools will start disappearing because the water will increase in size. So these ones that we know, the lower ones will not get. What would you say? Get some type of.
Well, they won't be as protected in the same way, and they'll be more subject to damage.
Thank you so much, you two. I was just going to follow on that Naomi Hart, who's speaking in a bit, will be talking about the impact of acidification on mussels. Oh, right. She's an artist as well, so you might be interested to tune into her. Thank you for that absolutely beautiful film and for joining us. Hope you might stay a bit longer today. And we're going to move across to Kathy for an update from Bristol, if she's there.
Yeah, can you hear me all right? Hello?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, I've got a totally different microphone set up. So, yeah, I'm going to share with you a little bit of underwater listening live from the Cumberland Basin. So, yeah, this is where I am in Bristol, just after the high tide. And, yeah, I'm going to attempt to send you some underwater listening experiences.
All right.
Here's my hydrophone. So here we go in. Let's get a bit of fishing for sound. Okay. So now we're going to transfer from air to underwater.
Look at that. That's glass, isn't it?
So that was a little dunk underwater. Now that rhythmic sound that you heard was quite a surprise. I'm not going to show them on film because I haven't asked if it's okay to film them, but there's some people doing some exercises with a rope attached to the railings. So that is quite interesting, thinking about how sound travels underwater. Sound does actually travel much faster underwater, 4 times faster than through the air, and actually travels even faster through solid objects. So it can be really surprising when you're listening underwater how loud some things sound, like someone just walking past can sound thunderous. So I'm going back, exploring my urban environment here at the edge of Bristol, and I had a little go at this earlier and it's really amazing. So I'm underneath the road bridge, the swing bridge, and we're gonna have a listen to the railings. Because the sound of the bridge will be coming through the railings. So let's have a listen. And so we're going to try and hear the resonant frequency of the sounds of the bridge through the railings. Now we're just going to move to a different bit of the railings, because part of what's happening is the width of the railings is tuning the sound. So we're going to just try this other section of the railings, hear the difference. trip to some different sound worlds. The Edge Point of Bristol at high tide. I think that's my time.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Wow. Thanks so much. That was a bit mind-blowing. We're going to move on and then we'll come back to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chris, are you in the room? Oh, can you unmute? Yeah, great. Lovely. Welcome.
Thanks. Can I just screen share one? Can you let me screen share?
Yes, hang on a sec, Chris. Sorry, just need to find.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, bear with you.
Oh well.
Yeah, I'm coming. Okay, now you should be able to screen share.
All right, lovely, thank you. By way of introduction, this is the view that I've been looking at over the winter. So just for everybody to have a sense of the place where I am. Okay, so how do I done? All right, there we go. Yes, so I am Chris Ruston, and I have a passion for making books from all sorts of things, mainly paper, but in actual fact, books I see can be not just the traditionally bound ones, but they can be sculptural. So, for example, this would be one which was a series that I made a couple of years ago. So most of my work is in some form or other based around the sea and the coast. So this was made, so it can actually come apart into 3 elements, and then we've got those pages there. So that's a kind of background of some of the things that I've been doing. I'm based in Essex, and I'm fortunate to live by the River Thames, and I live at the end of the estuary where the river meets the North Sea. So particularly during these winter months, it's been, as other people have been saying earlier on, just such a joy to be able to be near the coast. I live in Southend, which is a big urban town. So actually the estuaries become a really important place to be able to just go down there, especially early in the morning, to then just breathe and take in something of a different view and be connected to something other than the concrete that's around. So during this period, I've not been able to get to the studios. So the work that I've been doing has been made at home. And it kind of reflects in scale the fact I'm in a domestic setting. So I'm going to share with you just a few of the pieces that I've been doing. So this is one book. All of these prints, let me open this one out for you. So these have been reflections of the walks that I've been doing in terms either just of the colour and the textures that are around on that little bit of beach. It's an artificial beach. They did some dredging out in the river to make way for a bigger port further up, and they moved all of that sand and apparently sprayed it all across the beach. That was a couple of years ago. What's been interesting in just this last 2 months with all of the winds and rain and everything else, most of that has just disappeared and been shifting. So there have been real changes that you can see just in over a course of a couple of weeks. So again, these are just giving a sense of winter walks. What I realized when I was putting these together is that actually they've been created from about midwinter, so just on midwinter. And it feels these pieces are now concluding, and I'm moving into building on this beginning into further work. But yes, these are from midwinter through to spring equinox. So, but the estuary is very flat, and like earlier on, I think it was Western Supermare, you were talking about how far the tide goes out. Here, when it goes out over a mile. So the landscape will shift. You can stand at high tide mark, it's very close up to the seawall and the road and the buildings. But when it goes out a very long way, and it's very flat. And a lot of people feel that the Essex coast is quite desolate and maybe not as exciting as some other areas of the country. But I think it has its own beauty. And of course, that beauty is a lot of wide skies. And there's a very dynamic relationship between the sky and the water. So very often you will get these kind of mirror reflections that are just wonderful, just standing there looking out onto some of how these reflections are cast. So these books been made into concertinas. Oops, let's get that last page. Here we go. Sorry. Sorry, it's much easier when you've got them flat than holding them up. So as a concertina, it then opens out. So when making books, what I will also try to do is match something of the content of the book to the book structure. So these ones being concertina, kind of mimic that sense of the tide coming in, the tide going out. So there was that element.
Chris, can you
one of the things that I've also noticed is I've been paying attention to the strand line, and here the beach is very stony. So what you will have is you get this lovely black line running away into the distance. And it's kind of broken up by areas of bladderwrack. There doesn't seem to be too much else evident in terms of plant life or things. But I think that's an interesting line. Each day I go down there, it's as if it's been redrawn by each tide. So there's a kind of idea running around in my head to develop some work from that idea. So beach is also covered in the most amazing, wonderful textures. So again, yeah. So this is another piece of work. We don't have whales. We did have one whale came up the river, unfortunately didn't survive last year. But from making the work, these other pieces, this is now a piece that's moving me into the next project, which is then a book. It's based on things that I see, textures that have been revealed along some of the walks that I've done. But this has been inspired by some words from a poem by Hart Crane called At Melville's Tomb, in which really it's about life and death and cycles. It's about what the sea takes and what the sea returns. So, yeah. And again, it's a concertina book that unfolds.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your printmaking process? Are these all monoprints?
Yeah.
Or?
They are monoprints. I've not used a jelly plate before. I mean, I've heard of them and I've seen other people using them, but because, again, as I say, I'm at home, bought one of those up back in the autumn, and then, as I say, these are kind of some of the prints that you can get from. Very, very simple. So with the jelly plate, all you do is, it is a monoprint process. You roll out the ink and you can just place either stencils or objects onto the surface, and then it picks up the most amazing, beautiful details. So here's another example of the kind of details that you get. So in some respects, although this work is inspired by the view that I showed you at the beginning, what I'm not trying to do is represent that view realistically. What I've tried to do with these images is I've just come back with a collection of objects which have been found on the beach, and then just really been enjoying learning about this printing process. It's very simple, it's very immediate, and actually it's a lot of fun. So yeah, the content of these is obviously fairly monochrome at the moment, and I think for me, I love winter. I love the subtleties that you get. The light that is down there on the seafront at the moment is just so beautiful in low light. All of the textures, all of those weathered surfaces, because there's a lot of groins down there that are covered in barnacles. The textures are just fantastic. But yes, showing you this one as a close-up. These are some of the either bits of waste fishing line that have been found on the beach, some of the plant. Let's find one with the plants.
We've got quite a few other gel printers out there who are responding in the chat, but we also have a request from Julie about whether you have a website.
Yes.
So
yeah,
if we'll make sure that link gets put up on the website in a day or two. So thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is I do, usually I like visiting museums, and a lot of work comes out of visiting museums and working with a bit of history. One of the things, again, that has started to form in my mind from doing these walks is that it's really the history that is on these shores all around the country. But in terms of my little patch, the little bit that I've been walking, you know, you look out at the river, and the river is always, there's always something happening. There's boats arriving or boats going. There's birds arriving or departing. And it's a very active area. And but also it's the continuity, the thing over time, when you start thinking back. I think, again, someone earlier on said about the Beagle starting off, was it Plymouth? I can't remember there. You know, the Beagle would have been up and down the Thames. It would have also come in here. And in actual fact is apparently the remains of it are just around the corner of the coast at Paglesham. Apparently it's there in the mud, the remains of it. So it's kind of all these connections that we've got. We're all so connected. I think what I'd like to be doing is exploring some of those in the work that comes from all of this.
A question from Liz Wells there. She says that, you know, your books are obviously very tactile and ready to be experienced physically. Do you show them in that way, or do you how do you show
Yeah. It's always an issue with showing books, obviously. Yeah, what I do like to do is do book fairs. So I quite regular. Well, I've been going up to Norwich one regularly. So I'll do exhibitions like that. And in those environments, they're really interesting because you can actually allow people to handle the work. Because I think that is also quite important. The whole thing about books is it is the tactile nature of being able to pick them up and just draw them. And during there's a static photograph obviously just doesn't capture that. So yeah, I think it is important that people can handle them, but obviously depending on the work as well, though, it depends how fragile they are and how many people are handling them and in what way. But I would certainly like people to handle things.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was
okay.
Utterly fascinating. And
You're welcome.
we've put your website in the chat so people can look further at what you make. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to move to Naomi.
Hello, my name's Naomi Hart. I'm an artist and I live and work in Exeter in the southwest of England. And I want to talk to you today about a ship called the HMS Terror. And this is a project that I've started working on recently, and the story about her and where she travelled. So the BBC have made this much easier for me recently because I don't know if any of you have been watching the adaptation of the novel, The Terror, but it helps to tell a bit more about the background. It's made things easier to help tell the story. So I want to share a few slides with you first, and then I'll come back and show you a little bit of the work that I've been starting to do. So here I'm just sharing the screen. So hopefully there you can see an artist's impression of HMS Erebus and Terror. HMS Terror was built in 1813. She was originally built as a bomb ship for the Navy, and she served in the 1812 to 1815 wars in America. But she was later converted to become an Arctic and Antarctic exploration ship. And she was built in Topsham. And this is Topsham. This is just downstream from Exeter on the River Exe. And it's a small town, very pretty town today. But at one time it was the second largest port in Britain, and has a huge shipbuilding industry. So all along here were docks and associated buildings. And this picture is taken at low tide from the mud, from almost exactly the spot where HMS Terror was built, looking out towards the sea. So this would have been her first view of the sea. And there are all the other buildings, all of the docks, all of the ships that were being built there, all of the other buildings and all of the rest of the town would have been involved in this. So there would have been sail lofts, there would have been nail cellars. This would have been a huge industry. And I'm fascinated by the way the estuary looked at the time. She's obviously silted up. The river has silted up, so it would have been very different. What was the ecology like? What was the town like? What were people's lives like at that time? And those layers of knowledge and layers of history. And HMS Terror was 31 meters long, that's around 100 feet, which is about the size of a fully grown blue whale. So if you'd like to imagine a blue whale swimming along this estuary, you get some sense of just how huge these ships would have appeared at the time. And HMS Terror was converted, like I said, to become basically a science ship. So she was sent to the Arctic in 1836, and then later to the Southern Ocean, to the Antarctic. And she would have spent about 3 or 4 years down in Antarctica with Erebus. And they would have spent the summers in Antarctica and then retreated in the winter to Tasmania or to the Falklands to restock, to repair the ships if there was any damage. But they were still conducting science all the time. So part of the scientific research that they were doing was into the Earth's magnetism. So they were part of a global initiative to measure the Earth's magnetism around the globe on particular dates to try and understand more about how it works and how the tides feed into that information, how they're affected, how they affect each other. And a fascinating point, when she was in the Falklands in 1842, being repaired, they were still measuring the tides, conducting science, and they were measuring the high water. And there is a plaque on a particular rock where they measured the highest high tide in August 1842. And this information has been used by climate scientists in the present day to measure the difference in sea levels between 1842 and now. So to measure that sea level rise. So it's still feeding into knowledge today. There's this accretion of knowledge throughout the decades and the centuries that I'm fascinated by. She was conducting other research, so not only looking at geology and botany, but also looking at fish and marine life. And they would have caught a lot of marine life and kept them in jars as specimens and brought them back. And many of these are in collections around Britain, collections in Kew, for example. And you can still see some of the books. Some of the books are available online, but you can still see physical copies of these books with amazing illustrations. A lot of the sailors on board would also have been artists. So there are incredible paintings and illustrations of the places that they were visiting and the life that they saw. And part of this life that's really fascinates me is perhaps what Terra is most famous for, is that she sank. So the ships, both ships disappeared in the Arctic on the search for the Northwest Passage on the Franklin expedition. And it took us about 170 years to find them. So for all that time, nobody really knew what happened. And in the last decade, both the ships have been found under the Canadian and in the Canadian Arctic under the ice, almost perfectly preserved. So they've simply gone down almost complete under the water. And here we see another stage in this transformation. So from living oak trees to a bomb ship to a science ship, she's now transforming again into her own ecology. So here we have a new reef that's growing. So with seaweeds and anemones and corals and a nursery for fish, she's creating this new habitat. It's another transformation in her life. So I'm going to come out of sharing now. And one of the things I find fascinating is that I only discovered this recently, is that Darwin, when he was traveling on the Beagle, actually returned to Britain from that journey in October 1836. And HMS Terror left on her first scientific expedition in June of 1836. So these journeys overlapped. This was a tremendous time in history for scientific exploration. So we'd stopped kind of fighting wars temporarily, and we were just looking at understanding the Earth. It wasn't entirely altruistic. It was the Navy going out, and there were all sorts of territorial questions, and it was an awful lot about money, but there was an awful lot of scientific and artistic exploration going on. And Terra's story is completely bound up in tides and in weather. It was just particularly tragic that the years that she went up on the Franklin expedition were 3 especially cold winters. So the ice came earlier and harder than usual. And that was basically understood to be the reason why the expedition wasn't successful, that they were trapped in the ice much earlier than they expected, and they couldn't escape because it never really melted. So that's part of the tragedy of the story. I'm interested in all of these layers of knowledge, the layers of history, and the transformations that took place. So I've been looking a little bit at Topsham, so just the start of this project, and I've been doing a bit of mudlarking on low tide, and things I've found in the tides, in the mud in the tides. So there are cockles and mussels in the river, which are growing there, which are used to eat, and they're also fed on by other creatures, so the birds that come, the waders that feed on these. And these images are drawn in indigo, so it's handmade indigo paint. I haven't made it, but it's handmade indigo paint. So again, a plant that's transformed into a pigment to make drawings. There are bits of ceramic. So this is a ginger beer bottle, so one of those ceramic ginger beer bottles. There are all sorts of glass bottles around, thrown overboard by people building the ships at the end of a week, or possibly by the sailors. And I found an awful lot of acorns. So there would have been oak trees growing all the way along the banks of the River Exe, and possibly a lot of the ships would have been made from these oak trees. And using oak galls that I've found, I've also made oak gall ink. So there's a drawing of a mussel shell in oak gall ink. Again, this idea of transformation of the ecology. And as part of a longer project on the River Exe, I made a book. So this is made with recycled and found papers and materials. So this is a flooded map of the River Exe in oak gall ink. And then inside it's cyanotype made with river water with some objects, so mussel shells and objects that I found in the river whilst mudlarking. And that's a concertina book, just to sort of show the idea of the flow of the river. So that's some of the pieces I've been working on. This is just the start of the project. And I'm really interested in all of those layers of history and layers of knowledge. So watch this space, and hopefully I'll be able to tell you a bit more about HMS Terror. Thank you very much for having me.